Well, hello, Habit Change Challenge group. I am so excited to see you here today, getting engaged, watching what's going on, whether you've been commenting so far or not. We've got a really great size for this group. We're already close to 50 members, and that's just in the first few days of this year. So remember that you can share this, invite your friends if they're interested. It does not have to be a breast cancer related thing, although I know lots of us in the breast cancer world have habits that we really want to work on because we're kind of like woke to them, if you will. So today I want to talk to you about understanding habits, kind of the foundational pieces we'll need as we move forward. And one of the things that I'm going to say today is kind of controversial. So I'm excited to hear what your beliefs are on it, and whether or not you think what I say is accurate, or if you have a different take on it. So I'm excited for you to share that in the comments for this live stream or video. And again, obviously, you can still comment even if you don't watch this live. So without further ado, I want to talk to you again about kind of the foundations of habit, right? What do we know about habit? Um, I love to gather information from a variety of sources. And when it comes to habits and habit change, there are just so many really interesting sources out there. But one that really grabbed my attention for this particular part of the challenge was a podcast episode from the podcast The Happiness Lab, right? And on the Happiness Lab, Dr. Laura, the episode is called How to Kick Bad Habits and Start Good Ones. And if you have the time, definitely pull up her podcast and check it out. It's maybe, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes long, but super, super interesting. Lots more detail that I'll have the ability to share with you here. But one of the things that she gets at right away is that we know that boredom breeds bad habits, right? And one of the places, one of the anecdotes that she shared with this was from, it comes to us from the Vietnam War, right? So you had a lot of soldiers over in Vietnam, and during downtime, they found themselves in a situation where they were really bored. They didn't want to be there. They weren't in their normal settings, and they had really easy and cheap access to heroin. And so they saw a heroin epidemic kind of take over in soldiers while they were over in Vietnam. Now, what's interesting here is that as this kind of gripped the soldiers, the War Department really started to worry that this was going to be a real problem when soldiers went home, right? Obviously, they cared about the health of the soldiers while they were there, and kind of nipping it in the bud. But for those that were already addicted to heroin, which we know is like a super addicting substance, right? What was going to happen to these people when they got home, right? Are we going to send home a bunch of soldiers that are all addicted to heroin? And what kind of epidemic is that going to start, right? And so they brought in a psychologist to kind of start working with the soldiers. And what came from all of his work there was a lot of research and really kind of new information about habit and habit change. What was interesting is that everyone assumed that when all of these soldiers who were actively addicted to heroin in the one situation over in Vietnam, when they got home, they just knew, right, that they were going to continue to be addicted to heroin. And what they found was that close to 90% of the soldiers, when returned to their home environments, a different environment than what they had been in where they started the addiction, that they were able to break the habits and that they did not remain addicted to heroin, which is amazing, right? So some of the research that came out of that, because I mean, nobody anticipated that that's what would happen, ended up revealing two things: that boredom breeds bad habits, right? Really kind of solidifying that we know that. And that also that your environment has a lot to do with whether or not you continue a habit. And so that was super interesting. So the next thing, and this is kind of where the controversial part comes in that I started talking about earlier on. And I want to be checking, so forgive me, but I just want to be checking if anybody is posting comments or anything. Because if you have questions or comments along the way, definitely engage. I know lots of you aren't going to be able to join at the noon hour, and that's okay. Just post those comments later. But anyway, so what I mentioned that was going to be kind of controversial is this idea, right? Everybody talks about changing your habits and developing good habits, that it all has to do with willpower, right? You have to have enough willpower. I say it all the time, like my willpower is awful. I'm failing at everything I'm trying to do, those kinds of things. So we have this idea that willpower, if we could just control our behavior, if we had enough willpower to do it, we could change our habits. And there is a psychologist that she focuses on habit change, and she talks in this podcast, which is really interesting. Her name is Dr. Wendy Wood, and she says that this idea that we can change our habits through willpower and behavior control is really mistaken, right? We're wrong here, because when we have to exert our willpower, essentially what we're doing is giving power to the thoughts of the thing that we're trying to get past, right? And so what she says, and I'm going to quote her here, it is a mistaken belief that habit change comes through willpower. Willpower and behavior control makes you think about that bad habit, which then gives it power and allows it to reemerge, right? So you may be starting off the new year, wanting to change a habit. You've got all this motivation and excitement, right, to do this and make this change, and you're doing really, really well. And then things start to happen, and life and obstacles get in the way, and you start to falter. And that's when you start thinking, gosh, I just don't have the willpower to do this. I'm like, it's inevitable. I'm going to fail. And then, you allow that to kind of let you focus in on what it is that you're not having the willpower to do. And what she says, and where this kind of habit change challenge is focused, is that instead of focusing on the failures of our willpower and our inability to control our behavior, that really what we need to do is to create an environment that makes it easy to repeat the good behaviors, right? And so if we think about back to the story about the Vietnam soldiers and veterans, right? When they were put in a different environment, that was nearly enough to kind of help them change their habits, right? To help them get over it. And so what she's saying and what he found from his studies kind of really connect well, right? And so again, we want to create an environment that makes it easy to repeat the good behaviors over and over and over again until that action or that behavior becomes automatic. Let's think about it for a second. When you get up in the morning, you probably have some really automatic behaviors. Or when you're driving a car, right? These behaviors, these actions, these several steps of things that you do because you do them all the time, and there is usually some kind of reward at the end of that activity or behavior, it becomes an automatic process, right? You hear people talking all the time about driving a car and they kind of like zone out and all of a sudden they're where they need to be, right? A lot of what's going on there is that the behaviors of the driving, right? If you think about all the steps it takes, the pushing the gas, the steering, the paying attention to lights and signs and signals and other drivers and all of these things, all while we have other thoughts going on in our head, right? Our brain is able to process all of this automatically because we do it so often, right? It is the same behaviors over and over and over again. And the reward is that we get to where we need to be by driving there, right? So that's the reward in that situation. Let's go back to that morning coffee, right? So I don't know, maybe it's not coffee, maybe you have some other thing. I'll use coffee as my example because it is one of the things that I'm trying to kind of break. I get up every morning, right? And one of the very first things I do is I walk into the kitchen and I start either a cup or a pot of coffee, right? Because I'm going to have that coffee and it's going to make me feel more awake. And it's kind of like the trigger for the rest of my morning routine. And, it tastes good and it smells good and all of these things. But I don't take the time to say, hey, Kara, do you need a cup of coffee today? Do you need that extra boost of caffeine? Are you thirsty? Right? I don't take the time to do any of that. It's just an automatic thing because I've done it so often, right? So, what could I possibly do then to start changing that habit, breaking that habit, creating a different one, and creating an environment in which I can do that different habit? Maybe that means moving the coffee pot, or like moving it out to where I store, other appliances and not having it right there on the counter. Maybe that means not keeping the house well stocked with coffee, or maybe it means doing something differently every morning when I first wake up instead, right? Like drinking lemon water, which would be a much better habit for me because it would be incredible for my digestion and many other things, right? So we have these processes that we do all the time, right? These series of actions that we do all the time, and they just become automatic. And that's where the habit comes into play, right? Habit formation is simply behaviors that we repeat until they become mental shortcuts, right? You can do all these things and still get a reward at the end. So, it's really important that we kind of understand how habit works and what's at play here, and that we understand that maybe it's not about willpower, right? Because if we keep thinking about willpower and then we end up not accomplishing that habit change that we set out to, then we start in on all these other, the negative self talk of how we don't have willpower and how we failed and blah, 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 right? Instead, we're going to start this challenge, and we're going to start this approach where you've already had kind of a week to start working on those things that you wanted to pay more attention to, whether they're intentions or resolutions or just habits that you wanted to change, right? You've started off, and you're likely now starting to get to the point where there are going to be some challenges. And so now is the greatest time for us to really start this habit change challenge, and to kind of alert you to some of the other things that are going on so that you're more empowered to make great choices and change some of these habits. Our next live broadcast, I haven't scheduled it yet, but what we're going to be talking about is the 3 R's of habit formation, right? Along the way, I'm going to be sharing tons of information with you that hopefully, again, helps to empower you to make the changes you want to make. And I encourage you to go ahead, post on our introduction post, let us all know what it is, what the habits are that you want to work on, who you are, what it is you're trying to change or achieve. Let us all know. Support one another. I'll support you too. And I look forward to us getting through this together, and excited and to make some really great small changes in our life that really make a difference. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.